The Hebrew University of Jerusalem offers students from around the world the opportunity to live and study abroad in Jerusalem, and one of the world's most prestigious academic institutions. This exciting experience allows students to study with top educators in their fields, take interesting classes in a wide variety of subjects, and see what Israel has to offer, especially Jerusalem, one of the most beautiful cities in the world. So here to tell us more about it are Professor Arie Kacowicz, who teaches courses on international relations and the realities of the Middle East, and negotiating Middle East peace at the Rothberg International School, and Rausch, a student who is studying abroad at the Hebrew University. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
So, Professor Kacowicz, I'll start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about the courses that you teach at the Rothberg International School?
Well, those are two courses that deal with international relations in general and the Middle East and the Arab-Israeli conflict in particular. The first course, Theories of International Relations and Realities of the Middle East, is an attempt to combine both theories of international relations, looking at the very complexities of our neighborhood. The second course, which is entitled Negotiating Middle East Peace, the title tells us that the focus has to do with peace processes taking place in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict, especially since the 1970s until today. It's less theoretical, and it's a course that combines some historical background with current events.
And what is unique about these courses?
Well, the second course, which naturally it's closer to the reality of Israel and the Palestinian territories, I think it's unique in the sense that instead of focusing in the conflict, in the wars, it tries to analyze the different peace processes that have taken place, those that succeeded and those that failed. So I come to those courses with my background in peace studies as a peace scholar. So in that sense, it's unique. And I would say another dimension, since this is an upper level seminar for undergraduate students, I invite my students to interact. So every time, although I teach this course for the last 17 years, it's anew, it's fresh, because it's based on the interaction where students run part of the course and they present their research. So in that sense, I think it adds a particular dimension to the course.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Now, Matis, we'll turn to you. Can you tell us why you decided to come to the Hebrew University and why you chose his particular course?
Yes, of course. Back in the Netherlands, I study a course called International Studies at Leiden University, which is about politics, history, economics, and culture. And in that BA, I specifically focus on the Middle East and Arabic. So I did not just want to study about the Middle East, but also in the region. And the Hebrew University was, basically my first choice for two reasons. First of all, for academic reasons. As you said, it's a very prestigious university, and the second reason was basically Jerusalem itself, the city. It's from political, historical, cultural, religious reasons, it's a very unique place to be, not just for the region, but I think for the world as a whole. And those two reasons basically made me decide to come to the Hebrew University in general. And the course more specifically, I chose it, first of all, for the topic, because as I said, I have sort of a background in my BA focusing on the Middle East. So I did want to choose courses that are specifically focusing on the Middle East. And I like the mix between theory and practice, but also the positive outlook. So in international studies, basically I aim in my career later on to have a positive social impact, but mainly we study conflict and war, which is important to understand, but I always feel like there's one dimension missing, and that's how can we actually solve these conflicts. And that's why I chose this class, because this class has actually a positive outlook by looking at different peace negotiations that actually aim at solving these different conflicts.
And what are some of the highlights that you can tell us from this course?
Yeah, as I said before, I did like the mix. So on the one hand, we learned about different theories, different conceptualizations of peace, of mediation, but it was also very practical in the sense. We had a simulation on peace negotiations, where my part, for example, was the United Nations, which was very practical actually. So we did learn a lot about theoretical knowledge about the topic, but at the same time also practical skills. And this was basically the mix that, that was just great. And it was a very interactive course as well. So I did learn a lot. Yeah.
So you mentioned you've been teaching this course for 17 years, but this year I think you've had a lot of new stuff to work with, right? We've seen the Abraham Accords. Can you tell us a little bit about how that impacted teaching this course?
Well, you see, I always tell my students that I wish this course would be a history course rather than a current events. So once you resolve all the conflicts remaining essentially between Israel and the Palestinians, since there is not much left in the context, in the general context of the Arab-Israeli conflict, then I'm done. So we can refer that as part of the past. Unfortunately, this is a course which is very much alive, and I can tell you at the beginning, I got immersed in the subject as a direct result from the second Intifada in the early 2000s. That was my intellectual reaction to learn and to study and to understand and to teach students. And then it evolved. So there were peace processes along the way, right? In the late 2000s with the Olmert Plan and then with the Kerry Mission. And now the Abraham Accords, it's the last addition, you could say, to the large chain of peace events. So that's something that we can take and study. For instance, in the last year, I asked my students to study and read the Trump Plan, which nobody remembers now, but it was only last year. So I asked my students, read the document and then we can talk what's there. Because usually people talk about those issues without knowing the facts. So in that sense, the course evolved as the process evolved, and that's what makes every time anew. And as Matthias was referring, for instance, the simulation, it's an opportunity to teach about multilateral negotiations. And I can tell you from my experience in 17 years, I have been running simulations, and unfortunately, we never got to the ultimate political solution. But that's, I think, a wonderful opportunity for students to role-playing and to understand the complexities.
Mm. So, Matthias, I turn to you. Based on what Professor Kacowiczs just said, how do you think that his course will help you in your future career?
Yeah, it definitely will help me. So in my near future career, as Arie already said, in the course, on the one hand, it's a historical course, partly, but also very contemporarily relevant. And I decided to do my final paper about the Abraham Accords because I did want to choose something that's actually of more contemporary relevance. Because in my BA, I've written papers about, I don't know, the Arab Revolt in the 1940s, which was very interesting, but almost a century ago. So I wanted to have something more contemporary. And I'm still very interested in the topic. And the course really inspired me to dive deeper into this topic. And that's why I decided to actually write my BA thesis back in the Netherlands in the next semester about the topic. So that's how the course very practically influenced me in my near academic career. And also in the future, in my master's studies, I want to focus probably on development studies or Middle Eastern studies. So I aim to combine these two things, so like development studies with a regional focus. So I think that this course will also influence my academic focus on peace negotiations and the political economy of the Middle East.
I would qualify, again, what I would suggest, this is not a course about decision-making or policy, or it's not a course that I'm teaching students how to negotiate. But I'm trying to teach my students to be aware of all the different dimensions and then look into the future, because some of the students, where they are foreigners, some of my own students, they are Israelis, so they will be then the decision makers. So they should know the facts, and then we have the analysis. For instance, we spend a lot of time trying to understand what happened with the failure of the peace process between Israelis and Palestinians in order to look at the future. But having said that, I would warn that I'm not teaching diplomats or negotiators.
Mm-hmm. Now, another interesting thing that you both mentioned was the fact that this course is taking place in the Middle East, in Jerusalem. How do you think that this provides added value for the students?
I would use the example, for instance, one of the most complicated issues in negotiating Middle East peace is the issue of Jerusalem. What to do about Jerusalem, what to do about the Temple Mountain. So the best way to learn about that, you have to see that with your own eyes. And I can tell you, for years, visitors and students, once they come, they say, and they look from Mount Scopus, when you see this beautiful view of the old city, they tell me, but it's so small, it's 1 square kilometer, you know, and we talk about that, and it's a huge issue in international relations, so it's so small. So then get into the old city, walk around, and meet the different ethnic mosaic that you have there, so then that would be your own private field trip to make sense of the conflict. And another dimension I would say is that when people look from the outside, they think that this is a conflict that will never be resolved and it's one of the most difficult conflicts in the world. Walk around Jerusalem and then you'll get a different view. But for that, you have to come and see that with your own eyes.
Matis, would you agree? I mean, how has living and studying in Jerusalem provided you with added benefit?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, as I said before, I didn't just want to study about the region, but also in the region. I think looking back to my on my semester, it was basically, I'm very happy that I made the decision to come here because, yeah, it's actually on a daily basis you experience the region. So I live actually close to the old city. So on a daily basis, I was able to walk through the old city, walk through different neighborhoods in Jerusalem, which yeah, basically added this kind of complexity. I think that's what I learned the most of being here, that it's way more complex than I thought it is. And obviously I'm not a specialist on the region, but I did have some courses on the Middle East before. But being here obviously adds a totally different, also practical dimension to studying the region.
And so aside from academics, have you also had the opportunity, you mentioned, to explore Jerusalem a little bit. Have you had the opportunity to enjoy Jerusalem, the food, the people? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So more or less to my situation, I'm living close to the old city, as I said, in a very diverse apartment with students from the Czech Republic, from France, Germany, the UK. So it's a very, very vibrant and a nice atmosphere. All of us are studying at the Hebrew University. So on a daily basis, we also have quite deep and interesting discussions on different topics that we study on international relations, peace, international law, for example, all focusing on the region. But also, practically speaking, we do explore the city a lot together. And there's just so much to see. Even the old city. I'm in the old city almost every day, to be honest. But you find a new path, a new neighborhood every single day. You're surprised, and that's kind of for me the beauty about Jerusalem, that it's such a complex and interesting city.
I would add, if I quote a close friend, an expert on the conflict, Alan Doughty, he once wrote that Jerusalem is not just an issue for negotiations or a divine place that the three monotheistic religions, they dispute about that, but it's also a place where normal people like us live. And that's something that has to be emphasized.
Absolutely. To the students who are watching this now and maybe considering to come study at the Hebrew University, what advice could you offer them?
I would urge them, encourage them to come. And if you come and join us in Jerusalem, we are breaking stereotypes in all the different directions, with all the different narratives, with all the very complicated realities that we have. And it's not just an advertisement, it's one of the most vibrant and interesting places in the world. And we have probably the most beautiful blue sky, since we are close to the desert. Just come and live, because that will give you a different way of understanding the realities, right? And then probably once you come here, you might become a bit more optimistic, also if you take a course dealing with peace.
And Matis, I ask you the same question. What advice would you give to your fellow students?
Yeah, it's basically very similar. I mean, first of all, come and experience it yourself, right? Because you hear a lot of different discourses, not just in Germany or in Europe, all around the world, which may be, I don't know, positive, negative, whatever they are. But I think in the end, it's important to come here, experience it yourself. And it's, as I said before, a unique opportunity to, on the one hand, gain academic knowledge about the topic, but at the same time also to practically experience it. Because I think both is needed. Like, and I do like the mix of linking my academic focus with living here and practically experiencing it. And I think that's very unique. And I do encourage students also when they're here to take at least one regional specific course in order to learn more about the specificities of this region.
And I think the invitation should be not only for those who favor Israel, but also all for, sorry,
Yeah.
have to do that again. But I would send this invitation not just for those who are pro-Israelis or they like Israel, but also those who are the most critical voices against Israel. I would invite them to come to Jerusalem to study and see the reality by themselves. Probably they would change their mind or realize, again, as quoting Matthias, how life is complicated and interesting.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Our pleasure.
You're welcome.
So this is just one of dozens of incredible courses and programs that you can experience in numerous fields, from arts and humanities to the hard sciences, at the Rothberg International School at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem.